right. Hi. Welcome to Wake Up Wednesdays. My name is Nicole.
And I'm Lisa.
And we are so excited to have you here today. Our Wake Up Wednesdays is an opportunity to stay awake in our waking dream, where we have real human conversations about the shit in our lives, the different characters that are at play, and how we move through life being human.
Yes, that dance between unconscious living and conscious living in our daily dreams, waking dreams, and like, who cares? Like, why? Why do we even care?
Why does this,
So Nicole, what's the rabbit hole today?
The rabbit hole today is vulnerability, which even that word, you can feel like the essence of that word is like, ooh, that feels kind of scary.
I feel like the couple words just raw and like tender.
Yeah.
Just exposed.
Mm-hmm. Exposed is a really good word. So, but the thing is, vulnerability is important if you value humanity and if you value your own humanness and the humanness of the people that you love around you. And without vulnerability, there's no growth in our lives, and there's just complacency and stuckness and no ability to really move forward in all relationships. And we're actually going to be kind of tying the vulnerability aspect into the journey through the chakras and how vulnerability shows up in all those areas of our lives. And so what I'm going to come into right now is where the word vulnerability comes from. So the word vulnerability comes from a Latin word called vulnus, which means to wound. And so to be vulnerable is our capacity to be wounded and to be seen in our woundedness, and to be seen in our woundedness by ourselves and by others, and to be okay in that energy.
So with that said, we wanted to start with just that basic root energy of the root chakra or center of consciousness that really is that connection to our basic needs being met and survival. So literally, if we think about it, if we're feeling vulnerable, whether it's we don't have a place to call home, or sometimes it might be I'm not connected to my own inner home, or it might be, I don't know how I'm going to feed my kids this month, or something where the basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, everything of the earthly material, even our physical bodies and our health are a part of this. When we feel exposed and vulnerable in this realm, what happens is we actually have a physical response through the nervous system that is designed to help protect us, right? But everything else becomes secondary in those moments, right? So it's first, working with, so as we're talking today, think about, as we go through these different like centers of consciousness, think about how that vulnerability might show up for you in your life. For me, being a student and being a student now, well, I'm not a student anymore, but coming out of being a student, I went into that realm for like 2.5 to 3 years. And coming out just feels vulnerable because I haven't been out there, moving and shaking and practicing the way that I used to, right? So it feels like all the energy, for example, in my case, is hyper-focused on that.
Yeah, so when there's an inability to be vulnerable, there's a closing down of your system, regardless of where it's coming from the root all the way up to the crown. And it's a response because we're trying to protect the experience of vulnerability. Because in order to be vulnerable, there has to be a relational container, a safe space. So if we're going to have a vulnerable experience or a vulnerable conversation, or put ourselves out there in a very vulnerable way, there has to be a relational container within ourselves first. We first have to be able to witness our own flaws or insecurities or wounds or hurts or pains or whatever it is, and be okay with them, right? That goes back to our humanness, and this is why vulnerability is so important if you value humanity and you value the growth of humanity. And And then if you're having a conversation with somebody, say it's a friend or a parent or a child or a partner, a lover, there also has to be a relational container with that other person. So there has to be a shared safe experience with that other person, but first within yourself. There has to be that first. And then there has to be an understanding of when you're having a vulnerable conversation, whether, again, with your boss, with your friend, with a family member, with a lover, noticing if the vulnerability, the feeling of wanting to pull back or not be vulnerable, if it's a feeling of unsafe, because if it's an unsafe thing, then it might be a good reason to not have that conversation, or if it's just a feeling of discomfort, because we can collapse those two feelings. And I know that this is something that I'm also figuring out in my life, is it an unsafe thing, or is it uncomfortable to have these conversations, to show myself in a way that feels very exposed and open and raw and tender, to speak back to what Lisa was saying before.
And can I just
please
insert there? So we've now started to also shift to that next center of consciousness, which is the sacral chakra, kind of like the container of our relationships. We go from one to two, or duality, or I think you did a post recently on polarities of opposites, and that's where this even starts to begin. So kind of to echo what Nicole just said, that container of self, being okay with being vulnerable with yourself, having that container then allows us to be able to move into something where we're in relationship. Because what happens when we're in relationship? We mirror each other, right?
So it's just, I'm actually constantly in awe by the way that the universe puts people in front of us to see ourselves. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Mirror in your face.
Yeah, totally. Well, Brene Brown says it really good. By the way, Brene Brown is like the master at the power of vulnerability. So I would check her out if you're not sure who she is.
She has even a TED Talk.
She's a TED Talk on it. It's very good.
She has a lot.
She says, the last thing I want you to see in me, but the first thing I am looking for in you. And I think that that's really, really true for most of us. We expect that of others, yet we don't really want to show that part of ourselves with other people or situations or whatever it may be.
And that kind of goes to that root chakra, that innate way that we are built to protect ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's just not really safe even just being in this body. Just like any animal, it's that instinctual caveman part of our brain. Then we can get into the relationships.
The limbic system.
The limbic system, that's right. And then we can start to move up those energy centers into the belly area. The solar plex is our personal power. It's that energy of fire, right? And
fear. Right here.
There's a lot, and anger. So a lot of emotions with this energy center. And also, as you're moving into that space, right? If we're going up the path, it's nice to have relationships to be mirrored in, because we exist in our relationships, and then from that space we can create who we are, we can create things that we're up to, and we can harness that reflection and that power to support that container. And of course, when we're doing that, it's vulnerable, right? It's vulnerable to take risk.
It's a risk, yeah. So I think this is a good segue into the fears we have about being vulnerable, because I think that comes from, for me, that kind of relates to the solar plexus chakra, because this is about your confidence and the way that you show up in the world and how you present yourself. So if you're presenting yourself with an inability, hi Sean, if you're presenting yourself with an inability to not be vulnerable, then why? What is the fear coming from? What is the fear behind it? So some of the things that came to us, and we're open to, if you have any ideas that are your own, one fear is being judged by the world, being judged by the person that you're about to have a vulnerable conversation with, being even judged by yourself, right? By another part of yourself.
What I was going to say is, like, that anticipation of judgment, I think the place to start is really, where are we where's that within us? You know, and because it's that mirror that shows up right away.
Yeah. If I'm judging myself, then that, or if I'm thinking that person's going to judge me, then I must be judging myself in this area as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So simple.
Can't get out of it.
Can't get out of it. Another one is a fear of vulnerability would be being seen, like really being seen by, again, your community, your friends, your family, or that specific person that you're having that conversation with, because to be seen means they really, really have to see you. Or I could be on the totally opposite side of the spectrum where you're afraid of not being seen. Perhaps you're like, oh, well, if I express this, and they don't really know where I'm coming from, and they don't see me for where this is coming from and who I actually am, then there's no point in even putting myself out there.
And it just kind of made me think about just like this moment right now.
Yeah, being seen on Instagram.
Being seen on Instagram every other Wednesday, doing these lives, and just honestly that tension within myself of like really not wanting to be seen, and then and also wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard and wanting to share about this stuff that we find so juicy.
Yeah, because it is good and juicy stuff, and we feel like if we talk about it anyway, we might as well share it with the world. So,
but it feels vulnerable. I mean, I'll speak for myself, Nicole, to do this and to be here and to just, you know, put ourselves out there.
Feels vulnerable to be talking about vulnerability with you all.
Yeah, exactly.
Another fear that would come up around being vulnerable is the fear of abandonment. So feeling like if I tell this person this thing about me, then they might leave me, they might abandon me, they might not want me anymore, they might not love me, they might not accept me, they might not, all those things. So, and this can be in any relationship with your mother, with your son, with your uncle, with your best friend, with your lover, cat. With your I think my cats are just gonna love me unconditionally.
And right there though, with that, oh gosh, I just lost it, darn it. What
do you think,
say?
Arthur?
What did you just say?
That my cats are gonna love me unconditionally.
No. We're talking about vulnerability. We're talking
fear
about
of being
rejection.
Abandoned. Oh, that was the next
there's
one.
the abandonment, but like I feel like the sister one is fear of rejection.
Yeah.
I know for me, I mean, personal disclosure, hate it.
Sorry. We're good.
I feel like
there was a huge spider on me, but it's okay.
You could have seen it.
Yeah.
It was almost as big as her, if you know how big Nicole is. Anyway. Yeah, okay. Just that fear, you know, I think that's...
Kylie's laughing at me. That thing was so fast, too. I thought it was going to attack me. Okay, here we go. Whoosh.
Okay.
Next.
Yeah, what was the next one?
I think a question is, what makes you feel vulnerable? If you, and this is for you to contemplate yourself and to get curious about, what makes me feel vulnerable? Like, in what areas in my life do I feel so vulnerable that it almost feels painful to even have the conversation that I need to have? And really looking into that, because that really means that there's a part of you that wants to be expressed and wants to be heard, that wants their needs met. And it's probably really important to get that out in some way to whomever or whatever it needs to be receiving. Receiving is a really good one in vulnerability. Like being able to receive, because a lot of the times we are just like, no, I'm good, it's okay, I'm totally got this over here, I'm a rock, I'm strong, I'm solid. But there has to be that flow of give and take, the sea flow of inflow and outflow, and
which takes us to the heart.
Yeah,
because it's right there, held by the lungs, and it's that breath in and that breath out, and it's you know, it's this flow that just keeps going with each breath. It's also the center for compassion. It's the center for forgiveness, and I think that those practices alone can feel vulnerable.
That's so heart-centered.
And grief can feel very vulnerable, right? How many times have we had a loss? It's not just somebody in our lives necessarily. and we've just felt raw.
Yeah. Yeah, feeling raw. That's just vulnerable in itself. Yeah, we'd love to know. Thank you, Sean, for adding the receiving thing. What else makes you feel vulnerable? If anyone else wants to kind of type that into the chat bar, what makes you feel vulnerable?
Let's see. I think anytime, as I was saying earlier, like my biggest one is if I notice if I start to feel like the possibility of rejection, I'll have this natural like avoidance.
Yeah, so then there's avoiding of being vulnerable because of the rejection.
Because it's like I'd rather not be rejected, so I just won't,
Yeah, I would say mine is similar. I mean, I feel like all the things on the list that we kind of named before, I can relate to. Or I can,
at one time or another.
At one time or another, yeah. Let's see, right now I think it's probably, like, what would cause me to not want to be vulnerable? I think rejection would be one of them, and just not being accepted for all the parts that I am.
I got a good one.
Okay.
So, and I know that we'll talk about...
Mishi.
Hi, Mish! We'll talk about shadow at some point in one of these lives, but I feel like when our shadow, which is the parts and pieces that a lot of times we have a hard time looking at, have a hard time owning, they might be things that we're not proud of, or they might be unrealized potential, but when we're not ready and something wants to like bring light onto the shadow, that can feel very, very vulnerable. I know for me.
And then letting someone see your shadow, and owning it and letting that person love even the shadow part of you, right? That is vulnerable. That is a high vibrational relationship right there. Yeah. Is being able to love each other no matter what the relationship is with all the shadows involved.
And that almost jumps to the third eye. But I don't want to skip the throat because it's so important. So with the throat, we're in the realm of like communicating and listening, right? So the vulnerability of hearing something we don't want to hear, of saying something that makes us feel exposed or raw, of speaking our truth, and like really standing for what, like, not to bring it up, but we all know that it's kind of heated out there right now with an election around the corner, right? And it can feel very vulnerable right now for some of us to speak our truth,
because of the shaming and all the other things that are happening outside of the situation.
So, and then when we're not doing that, there's a misalignment that begins to happen because at the same time we're not being seen and we're not being heard, just like what you were talking about with the fears, right?
Yep.
And then the listening piece of it too, I think that could bleed right in with the shadow, is just not hearing what we want to hear.
Right. That I think goes back to rejection. Like, I'm going to express this to you and then you say something back to me that's something I don't want to hear. I'd rather just not have the conversation.
Right. Yeah.
But so now this is going to bring me into, okay, if you're choosing to not have the conversation that you really need to have, or do the thing that you really need to do, or put yourself out there in a way that you really need to put yourself out there, you get stuck. And I'm going to use the analogy of an animal that lives in a shell. So if an animal lives in a shell, it can only grow to the capacity of that shell. And in order for that animal to get larger and grow, it has to move to another shell, which means that it has to soften in order to get out of the shell. And it has to be really brave and be vulnerable, expose itself in a very vulnerable way in order to make its way over to the new shell that is more expansive, more open, more room to grow, more spacious. And in that transition, again, there's that vulnerability so that animal can now grow into a bigger shell, because we can only grow as much as the shell that is surrounding us, the walls of the shell that are surrounding us. So if you want to stay in that shell, then that's a choice of yours. But if you're really wanting to grow and expand yourself as a human being and as a person living on this earth, then change shells.
And that leads us, seriously, we didn't even plan it this eloquently.
To the crown.
But no, it leads us to the third eye.
Yes, well,
Because-
we already, yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, coming back to that, right? And so the third eye being the way we view the world, our
Yes.
connection to inner wisdom, feeling vulnerable. First of all, just in the way we see our reality.
Perception, which
Our
you can read my
perception.
post if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think, so then now I'm going to bring us into the crown, which is when you have the ability to be vulnerable, there is a deep, deep trust. A deep trust that you are going to be fully supported in your vulnerability, whether it goes the way that you absolutely planned and wanted it to go or it doesn't. Knowing that however that situation worked out for you was divinely guided, and there's that complete trust of, I know that this is in alignment with the highest good of me and other people involved in the situation.
Yes, and there's that ultimate vulnerability at the crown of full surrender to something bigger, just something bigger, and that I really feel like that complete release of control, or the illusion of it.
Yeah.
So with that, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it kind of brought me back to my post of like letting go of your perceptions and your interpretations, because it's your interpretations that control your world and control your experience. And being with the felt sense experience that's in your body is a really beautiful way to start to get vulnerable with yourself, is to honestly and truly and deeply feel all the discomfort, all the joy, all the beauty, all the hurt, all the pain, all the amazing bliss within your body is a really perfect way to start that vulnerability relationship with yourself.
And Byron Katie, just a little bit of a tool for your third eye. She has this platform called The Work, and it's a really great way. It's a series of questions that you can use them to actually get connected to what's the truth. Is this a narrative that I've made up?
I use the question all the time when my mind's making up a story. Is this thought true?
Yes, that's the first one.
And most of the time it's not. Especially when it's a story and it's of negative talk or negative cognition or negative whatever. Usually if you ask the question, is this true, it's just not true, because it was never spoken anywhere except in my mind that has created the story.
And that could open up a whole can of worms.
Which we
For
won't get
who's
into.
talking. So we're not going to get into that. But we do want to also put out there, for those of you that are not aware, we do a sister circle for all the women every month, and we'll be having one live this Sunday in Costa Mesa. So if you're local in Orange County, you can either go on to my bio, or I think your bio.
Yep, you can
and
just click the link.
Click the link and you can save your spot. And then we have a virtual one, so anywhere in the world that you are, on Wednesday the 21st at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So we love doing these. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, if you have any requests or any anything that you're working through and you want to keep confidential, obviously we'll keep it confidential, but if there's something that you'd like us to talk about, let us know. All the feedback has been really great, and we're really grateful for all of your support in our Wake Up Wednesdays, and thank you for allowing us to be vulnerable and to be seen.
So we'll see you again, not next week, but the next Wednesday. I don't know what the date is.
Instagram. No, I'm not
On
sure
my
either.
Instagram, Limitless and then the letter U, and we'll have a juicy topic. We just don't know what it is yet.
Nope. But it'll be good, it'll be juicy, and let us know if you have any questions, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Lots of love.
Namaste.